Space Invaders for Android using Flash Air. Part 1 Overview. So here is Space Invaders. And I think you know how it plays, so here we go. This is an explanation of how we've set things up to work. First of all, the symbols. Barrier down at the bottom. I'm not using barrier old, by the way. Bullet, invader, invader boundary, what it's going to hit off of on both the left and the right sides, and so on. So maybe that's the one thing that I'll introduce to you right now, is just generally how this is supposed to work, with the invader boundaries being what controls when they change going left or going right. So I'll run it. Here we go, touch, layer. So the idea is I'm just going to hide behind one of these barriers. That when it gets to the right, you can just barely see it maybe in the video, that it hits something, and that causes all the invaders to go down and to go back. So let's take it one step at a time, going back to frame 1. So frame 1 is where we're attaching all of the stuff. So basically, there's a tap on the green button, and it takes us to frame number 2. Here we are in frame 1, touch tap. Very last thing that is done down here is we go to and play. So this part 1 video will be about what happens before we go to and play frame 2. Up at the top then, we have 2 groups of variables. One, the arrays. The barrier array, the 4 barriers down here. The invader array and the invader bullet array. Then we've got our bullet from our spaceship and the invader bullet. I guess there's an array of them, so the invader bullets, and the background. The background's just black. So those variables are able to be accessed by everything in this tap handler function here, and will be able to be accessed by every other function in every other frame. They're global variables. Over here, we'll need to access, for example, the invader bullet array and everything else. That's why all 6 or 7 of these are outside of any function, so they can be available global to all functions. So here we are. The tap handler function will be called when the start button is touched. First, fairly straightforward, the space background just gets added. There's no need to do an X and a Y for the space background, because the way that it's made is that at the origin, 0 and 1 is where the corner is. So it'll go perfectly by being attached up at the upper left-hand corner. No need then for X and Y for it. The bullet, this is the bullet that we're going to shoot, gets attached just before the spaceship. You'll notice that this is because we want the bullet behind the spaceship, because when we're playing this game and moving the spaceship back and forth without a bullet being fired, we don't want to see the bullet. So the bullet right now is behind. You can't see it, but the bullet is behind our spaceship. When we click there, you can see that it's coming from under it, and that's where we want it. We want it to be a level below the spaceship. So background 0, bullet 1, spaceship 2. And both of these lines of code are doing roughly the same thing, one for the bullet, one for the spaceship. So the bullet variable up here is now assigned a new bullet. It's added to the stage and it's given an X and a Y that's appropriate down at the bottom of the stage. Spaceship then goes to exactly the same place as the bullet, because the bullet will travel with the spaceship. So instead of writing 255 and 600, I more correctly put bullet.x and bullet.y in case later on we decide to change those numbers. So anyway, they're in the same spot. The bullet and spaceship are in the same spot. Then the barriers. Once again, these 4 green things. we're going to loop through the barrier array's length, which we can see up above is 5. Oh, I've got 5 barriers. And each time through this loop, for the 0th, the 1th, 2th, if you put it that way, the 3rd and the 4th, times through, we're going to make a new barrier, add it down near the bottom. All of them will be down near the bottom, around 540. Y of 540 was going to be right about around here. 540 is going to be right about here. Only we'll want them spaced out. One barrier here, one there, and so on. So the way we achieve that is to make the x equal to barrier offset plus 100 times I1. So the first barrier offset number, the first x value, is going to be I1, which is 0, times the barrier offset, which we've got, oh, it's right up here, 100, plus 100. So that's going to give us 200. You know what? That's going to give us 100, because it's going to be 0 times 100 is 0, plus 100 is 100. The first y, the first barrier, will be right around here. And the second time through then, the I value goes up by 1, so I1 is going to be 1, and 1 times the barrier offset of 100 is 100, plus 100 is 200. So the number 1 barrier is going to be at 100, and then 200, and then 300, and then 400. In terms of the scale, I made them a little bit big when I made them over here, so I'm just scaling them by 50%, adding them, giving them each a unique level number, using the I value, which goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So what we're going to have is levels 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And finally adding the particular barrier that was just made to the barrier array. So when we're finished, all 5 of the elements of the barrier array will have a barrier. Next, the 2D matrix of invaders. These guys. We're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 9, 10, 11 columns. So the first thing we do is make, well, we've already made the array of rows. And that array of rows is 5. Oh, I only did 4. Okay, so 4. For each one of those rows, we're going to make an array of columns. It's a little bit tricky to understand, but this is a 2-dimensional array. It is an array of rows, and each row, like row 0, is an array of columns. So then we can loop through the columns of the 0th row, and then loop through the columns of the first row, and so on and so on and so on, looping and doing the outer loop, looping, 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 doing the outer loop, and so on, going through each one of the invaders. So each time through, the very first time when we're actually making the invaders, what do? We make a variable called invader, which is of the type invader, and it's a new invader. This guy over here. And we give it a row and a column, y and x. And I think, I'm not going to try to explain that with words, but basically, since this row value goes up and this column value goes up, them multiplied by the offset, 35 is going to be the space between them horizontally, 50 is going to be the space between them vertically. That'll all work. The math will all work quite well. and they'll all be spaced out nicely. And we scale them a little bit because I made it a little bit big, and we set is invisible to true. You see how that works later on. Same old thing, adding as a child, giving a particular level number, and adding the particular invader to the invader array, which it actually is a two-dimensional array. So that the very first time through, we do row 0, column 0. Then we do row 0, column 1, row 0, column 2, and so on and so on and so on through that first loop through, the inner loop. And then when row is 1, there's row 1, we do the same thing. 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3. Each one of them getting an invader to start. Then we'll just need to set up our invader bullets, which are going to rain down on us. And we go through and we take the I bullet, which is an invader bullet, which looks like, oh, it's white. That's why you can't see it here, white on white. And give it an initial X and Y value way up at the top. Or no, way down at the bottom, actually, way down at the bottom. And same old thing, add child, so we add it to the sage, and add each of the however many I bullets there are, 9, to the I bullet array. So once the space background, the bullet, spaceship, the barriers, the invaders, and the invader bullets are all attached, then we're ready to go to and play 2. And you're ready to go on to part 2 of this series.